The first time I realized my family had already decided my future without me was at my grandmother's Christmas dinner, the night my name was quietly removed from a document I had never been allowed to see. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that everyone stopped talking when I walked into the dining room. I'm Eleanor Price. I was 31 years old when I learned that love, in my family, had always come with fine print. That Christmas Eve, the house looked exactly the same as it had every year since I was a child. The Price family home sat on a hill outside Asheville, a white colonial with pillars that had been repainted so many times the wood beneath had softened. Garland wrapped the banister. A fire burned in the stone fireplace. Everything screamed tradition, stability, legacy. What no one mentioned was that the legacy no longer included me. I noticed the silence first. My mother, Patricia, stood at the head of the table, adjusting the candles, her smile stiff, practiced. My father, Robert, sat in his usual chair, glass of bourbon already half empty. My younger brother, Caleb, leaned against the counter, scrolling his phone, pretending not to look at me. My sister-in-law, Marissa, was the only one who met my eyes. "Hey," she said softly. Too softly. Something was off. I had driven 4 hours to be there, after working a 12-hour shift at the hospital. I was a compliance manager for a regional healthcare network, the kind of job people didn't understand but relied on to keep institutions from imploding. It paid well. I was good at it. I had built my career without a dollar from my parents, without connections, without favors. And still, the moment I stepped into that house, I was 12 years old again, waiting to be told where I belonged. Dinner was tense. Conversation skimmed the surface. Weather, traffic, a new restaurant downtown. No one asked about my job. No one asked about my life. Halfway through the meal, my grandmother's lawyer arrived. That should have been my first clue. Henry Wallace was a thin man with careful eyes and a voice that never rose. He had represented my grandmother, Lorraine Price, for over 20 years. He didn't attend family dinners, ever, but there he was, standing in the doorway, coat still on, leather briefcase in hand. "Henry," my father said, standing abruptly. "Didn't expect to see you tonight." Henry nodded politely. "Good evening, Robert, Patricia." His gaze flicked briefly to me, then away. Grandmother Lorraine was not at the table. She hadn't been for months. Alzheimer's had taken her piece by piece, leaving behind someone who smiled vaguely and forgot names, but not, as I would later learn, everything. "We'll just need a moment," Henry said, "if now is convenient." My mother's fingers tightened around her napkin. Of course. Family meeting, everyone. Family meeting. 2 words that always meant decisions had already been made. They moved to the living room. No one invited me. I followed anyway. They sat. Henry opened his briefcase. Papers were removed, stacked neatly on the coffee table, that still bore scratches from when my brother and I had played there as kids. "This is simply a formal acknowledgement," Henry said calmly. "Your mother wanted to ensure everything was clear before the end of the year." My mother nodded. "It's just paperwork." Paperwork. Henry looked at my father. "The revised trust reflects the current structure of the family business and estate, as discussed." Revised. Trust. My stomach tightened. "What revision?" I asked. 4 heads turned toward me at once. Surprise. Annoyance. Something else I couldn't name yet. "This doesn't concern you, Ellie," my father said quickly. That was the moment something inside me went very still. "I'm part of the family," I said. My voice sounded steady, detached, like it belonged to someone else. Henry cleared his throat. "Eleanor is named in the previous document." Silence. My mother shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. "That's no longer relevant," she said. "Circumstances have changed." "What circumstances?" I asked. My brother finally looked up from his phone. "Jesus, Ellie, why do you always have to make things awkward?" I stared at him. Caleb, 2 years younger, had worked exactly 1 year of his life inside our family's real estate company before being promoted to a role with no clear job description and a salary I could only guess at. "Henry," I said, ignoring Caleb, "am I still named in my grandmother's trust?" Henry hesitated, just long enough. My father stood. "This isn't the time." "That's an answer," I said quietly. My mother exhaled sharply. "Fine. Yes, things were adjusted. Adjusted how? She looked at me like I'd asked something unreasonable. Eleanor, you're independent. You've done well for yourself. Caleb is involved in the family business. He has responsibilities. I felt the words land, one by one. So I was removed. No, she said quickly. Not removed, reallocated. I almost laughed. Henry spoke again. Eleanor, the revised trust excludes you from the controlling interest in the Price Development Group and reallocates future inheritance assets to Caleb. Controlling interest. Future inheritance. Excluded. I nodded slowly. And when were you planning to tell me? My father's jaw tightened. We didn't think it was necessary. There it was. Not necessary. I looked around the room. At the furniture I grew up with, the photos on the wall, family vacations I remembered differently than they did. You made this decision without me, I said. My mother folded her arms. We made the decision that made sense. For who? For the family, she said. I realized then what she meant. By family didn't include everyone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just asked one question. Is this final? Henry met my eyes. It is legally binding as of this afternoon. I nodded again, calm, collected, because somewhere between the silence at the dinner table and the word excluded, something shifted. I wasn't angry yet. I was clear. And clarity, I would learn, is far more dangerous than rage. I picked up my coat. Dinner's not over, my mother said sharply. For you, I replied. It is. As I walked toward the door, my father called after me. Don't do anything rash. I paused, hand on the doorknob. I won't, I said. I'll do something precise. And I meant it. I didn't know then how deep the betrayal went, or how far back it started. I didn't know that the paperwork signed that night had a weakness no one bothered to hide from me. But as I drove away from that house, Christmas lights blurring in my rearview mirror, I made one decision that would change everything. I would stop asking to belong, and I would start reading everything they hoped I never would. I didn't cry on the drive home. That surprised me. In the past, smaller slights had left me shaking in my car, gripping the steering wheel, replaying conversations I wished I'd handled differently. This time, there was nothing to replay. No sharp words, no scene, just facts. I had been excluded. Quietly, efficiently, like an accounting adjustment. The highway was nearly empty, the kind of late-night stretch where the road feels suspended outside of time. My phone buzzed twice. I didn't look. I already knew who it was. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex in Charlotte, it was close to midnight. Third-floor walk-up, beige carpet, a place I'd chosen because it was affordable, close to work, and mine. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and did the first thing that felt honest. I poured a glass of water and sat at my kitchen table. No wine, no dramatic collapse onto the couch, just water and silence. This is what they think of you, I told myself. This is what they've always thought. They just finally put it on paper. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. Then I opened my laptop. I work in compliance. I read contracts, policies, bylaws for a living. I know where people hide things. I know what language gets used when someone wants control without accountability. And I knew, instinctively, that my family hadn't just excluded me out of nowhere. There would be a trail. I started with what I had access to. Public records, corporate filings, anything tied to Price Development Group. The company had been started by my grandfather, Samuel Price, 40 years earlier. He built it from a single commercial property into a regional real estate firm with holdings across 3 states. When he died, my grandmother inherited everything. She was never involved day to day, but she owned it all, on paper. In practice, my father had been running the company for years. I pulled the most recent filings, board structure, ownership percentages, trust designations, and then I saw it. 6 months earlier, a new holding entity had been created, Price Legacy Holdings, LLC. Registered agent, Robert Price. Managing member, Caleb Price. I leaned back in my chair. That wasn't an accident. I kept going, cross-referencing dates, amendments, signatures. The revised trust Henry mentioned wasn't just about inheritance. It was about control, voting rights, transfer authority, Succession planning. They hadn't just decided I didn't deserve future money. They had decided I didn't deserve a voice. My phone buzzed again. This time, I picked it up. Mom. I let it ring out. Then, a text. Can we talk? Last night got out of hand. I stared at the screen. Out of hand. I typed nothing back. Instead, I opened a new document and started making notes. Questions first. Always questions. Why now? Why 6 months ago? Why rush it through at Christmas? And most importantly, why did my grandmother's lawyer hesitate when I asked if it was final? That afternoon, I drove to Asheville General. My grandmother lived in the memory care wing on the 4th floor. She didn't always know who I was anymore, but she knew my face. That counted. The nurse at the desk smiled when she saw me. Eleanor, right? She asks about you. That surprised me. I knocked softly and stepped into the room. Grandma Lorraine sat by the window, hands folded in her lap, staring at the trees. Her hair was thinner now, her posture smaller, but when she turned, her eyes sharpened. There you are, she said. You look tired. I smiled. I am. I sat beside her. We talked about nothing at first. The weather, the birds outside, a television show she half remembered. Then I said, gently, Grandma, do you remember signing some papers recently? Her mouth tightened. Yes, she said. That was more than I expected. Do you remember what they were for? She looked at the window again. Your father said it was to keep things simple. Simple. Did Henry explain them to you? She hesitated, then shook her head. He wasn't there. My chest went cold. Who was? She closed her eyes. Your mother, your brother. I swallowed. Did you want to change anything? I asked carefully. Her eyes opened. Clearer now, focused. No, she said. I wanted things fair. The word hung between us. Fair. I reached for her hand. Grandma, do you know that I was taken out of the trust? Her fingers twitched. No, she said immediately. That's not right. Something sharp flickered across her face. Anger, maybe. Or fear. I told them, she continued, her voice firmer, that everything was to be split evenly. I said it more than once. I squeezed her hand. I believe you. She looked at me then. Really looked. They think I don't know what's happening anymore. I didn't say anything. They forget, she said quietly, that I built that life before any of them. I sat with that. When I left, I didn't feel comforted. I felt armed. 2 days later, Henry Wallace returned my call. I was hoping you'd reach out, he said. Why? I asked. A pause. Because there are aspects of the revision that made me uncomfortable. I closed my eyes. Can we meet? I asked. Yes, he said. I think we should. We met at his office downtown. Neutral territory, glass walls, certificates framed just so. He didn't waste time. Eleanor, he said, your grandmother did not initiate the changes made to the trust. I nodded. I know. The documents were signed, he continued. But there are questions about capacity and disclosure. My pulse steadied. Questions, how serious? Serious enough, he said carefully, that if challenged, parts of the revision could be invalidated. I leaned forward. And the company? Henry exhaled. That's more complicated. Explain. The company restructuring was done through separate instruments, he said, but it relied on assumptions about future inheritance and control. Assumptions. If the trust is challenged, I said slowly, the foundation of that restructuring weakens. Henry met my eyes. Yes, I sat back. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about leverage. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt something that wasn't grief or disbelief. I felt momentum. Henry folded his hands. I need to ask you something, Eleanor. What? Do you want to fix this quietly? He said. Or are you prepared to let it become very public? I thought about my parents' faces at the table, the silence, the word excluded. I thought about my grandmother, sitting by the window, realizing too late who had spoken for her. I don't want to fix it, I said. Henry raised an eyebrow. I want to take my hands off the wheel, I continued, and let the truth drive. He studied me for a long moment. Then he said, you should speak to an attorney who doesn't care about family dinners. I smiled faintly. I already have one in mind. As I left his office, my phone buzzed again. A text from Caleb this time. You didn't have to storm out. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I didn't reply, because I had finally understood something they hadn't. This was already big. They had just mistaken my silence for surrender. The lawyer I chose didn't look like my parents. That mattered to me. Her name was Dana Morales. Early 40s, sharp eyes. No family photos on her desk. No small talk. She specialized in estate litigation and corporate governance disputes, the kind that didn't end with apologies, only outcomes. She listened without interrupting while I laid everything out. Christmas Eve, the revised trust, my grandmother's condition, the new holding company, Henry's hesitation. When I finished, she didn't react emotionally. She just nodded once and said, "They rushed this." I felt a quiet click inside my chest, like a lock turning. "That's good, right?" I asked. "It's sloppy," she said, "and sloppy leaves fingerprints." She stood, walked to the whiteboard on the wall, and started writing dates, arrows, names. "Your grandmother is the key," Dana said. "Capacity and intent. If we can show she didn't understand what she was signing, or that material information was withheld, the trust amendment becomes vulnerable." "And the company?" I asked. Dana capped the marker. "That's where it gets interesting." She turned back to me. "Your father and brother created a structure that assumes future control. They didn't wait for the inheritance. They acted like it was guaranteed." I nodded. "Because they assumed I wouldn't challenge it. They assumed you wouldn't even know," Dana corrected. She pulled a folder from her desk and slid it toward me. "Here's what happens next, if you want to proceed." I opened it. Legal language, timelines, potential outcomes. This wasn't fast. This wasn't dramatic. This was methodical. "You need to understand something," Dana said. "Once we file, this stops being private. Your family will know you're challenging them." "I know," I said. "And they will try to control the narrative," she continued. "They'll say you're greedy, unstable, unreasonable." I looked at her. "They've been doing that my whole life. They just didn't need words before." Dana studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right," she said. "Then let's talk about leverage." The next move wasn't filing. It was waiting. Not passively, strategically. Dana advised me to gather everything quietly. Emails, texts, old documents, anything that showed a pattern of exclusion or pressure. I went home and opened boxes I hadn't touched in years. Childhood paperwork, old birthday cards, letters from my grandmother. One card stopped me cold. It was from 3 years earlier, handwritten, shaky. "Ellie, you are stronger than they think. Don't let anyone decide your value." I sat on the floor with that card in my hands for a long time. Meanwhile, my parents escalated. They didn't call. They sent messages, controlled ones. "Your father is very upset. We need to resolve this as a family. You're misunderstanding the situation." I didn't respond. Then came the invitation. Sunday dinner. Just us. No lawyers. I showed Dana the message. She smiled thinly. "They want to see if they can still manage you in person. Should I go?" I asked. "Yes," she said immediately. "But not to reconcile." "Then why?" "Because people reveal themselves when they think they're regaining control." So I went. The house looked the same, smelled the same, even the food was the same. Roast chicken, green beans, potatoes. Familiarity as strategy. My mother hugged me too tightly. My father barely touched me. Caleb smirked. We sat. "We just want to clear the air," my mother began. I nodded. "Go ahead." My father leaned forward. "Eleanor, you've always been sensitive." There it was. "We didn't exclude you," he continued. "We adjusted things based on involvement." "Involvement?" I asked. Caleb laughed softly. "You left. You chose your career. The business needs someone committed." "I was never offered a role," I said. "That's not true," my mother snapped, then stopped herself. My father shot her a look. I watched them. The glances, the corrections, the dance. "You didn't ask," my father said finally. I tilted my head. "Did you want me to beg?" Silence. "We thought you'd be happier without the pressure," my mother said. "You're always so independent." Independent. The word they used when they didn't want to feel guilty. "So you removed me from the trust," I said evenly. "Without telling me." My father sighed. "It's not removal. You still benefit indirectly." I smiled slightly. "Explain how." He couldn't. Caleb leaned back. "Look, Ellie, this isn't personal. It's business." That was the moment. I stood. "I'm glad you said that," I said calmly. Because if it's business, then I'll respond accordingly. My mother's face paled. What does that mean? It means, I said, you should direct any further communication to my attorney. My father's eyes widened. You hired a lawyer? Yes. For what? Caleb scoffed. To understand my options, I replied. Fully. The temperature in the room changed. My father stood. You're threatening us. No, I said. I'm protecting myself. We're your family, my mother said, voice shaking. I looked at her. Really looked. Family doesn't make decisions for you and call it love, I said. Family doesn't take away your voice and expect gratitude. Caleb laughed again, sharper this time. You think you can take us on? You don't even know how deep this goes. I met his gaze. You'd be surprised what I know. I left before they could regroup. 2 days later, Dana called. They filed a motion, she said. My heart rate barely changed. For what? To consolidate control formally. It's defensive. Good, I said. That means they're nervous. She paused. There's something else. What? Your grandmother requested an independent capacity evaluation, Dana said. Through a court-appointed physician. I closed my eyes. That wasn't us, Dana added. That was her. When I visited Grandma again, she looked tired but determined. They think I don't remember, she said. But I remember enough. She took my hand. I don't like what they did, she whispered. I don't like being used. I squeezed her hand. Neither do I. As I left the facility, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from my father. This is getting out of hand. Call me. I deleted it. Because what he didn't understand yet was this. The moment they chose control over transparency, they lost the right to guide how this ended. And I wasn't angry. I was focused. The first letter from their lawyers arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my apartment door like a warning no one wanted to sign for. Cease and desist. Defamatory statements. Interference with business operations. I read it once, then again. Then I set it down on my kitchen counter and made coffee. This was their pattern. Escalate quietly, intimidate formally, and hope I would fold before anyone else noticed. I forwarded the letter to Dana without comment. She called me 10 minutes later. They're bluffing, she said. Poorly. What does that mean for us? I asked. It means they're scared of discovery. That word again, discovery. The phase where documents stop being optional and stories have to match paper. Dana explained it calmly, like a doctor outlining a procedure. If this goes forward, they'll have to produce internal emails, meeting notes, communications related to the trust amendment and the restructuring of the company, she said, including anything involving your grandmother. I leaned back in my chair. And they don't want that. No, she said, because people who manipulate behind closed doors rely on silence, not records. That afternoon, something else happened. I got a call from Marissa. My sister-in-law had always been careful with me. Polite, observant, quiet in a way that suggested she saw more than she said. Eleanor, she said, voice low. Are you alone? Yes. Good. I shouldn't be calling you. I didn't interrupt. There are things you need to know, she continued, about how this was done. I closed my eyes. Start wherever you want, I said. She exhaled. Your parents started talking about changing the trust over a year ago. Right after you got that promotion, I frowned. That doesn't make sense. It did to them, she said. Your father said you were getting ideas, that you might expect a say in the business. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. They didn't want that, she continued. They wanted things clean, simple, one line of control. Caleb, I said. Yes. I stayed silent, letting her keep talking. They framed it as protection, Marissa said. For you. They said you didn't like conflict, that you'd be happier without involvement. I almost laughed. And the holding company? I asked. She hesitated. That was rushed. Your father pushed it through after your grandmother's last hospital stay. My jaw tightened. He thought she wouldn't notice. Yes. Did Caleb know? I asked. A pause. He didn't ask questions. That told me everything. Why are you telling me this? I asked quietly. Because I watched them do it, she said. And because I don't want my kids growing up thinking this is normal. I absorbed that. Marissa, I said, if this comes out, it will be messy. I know, she replied. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you not to protect them. After we hung up, I sat very still. Then I wrote everything down. Names, dates, phrases she'd used verbatim. Dana listened carefully when I relayed it. "This corroborates intent," she said. "It strengthens your position significantly." "Will she need to testify?" I asked. "Eventually," Dana said. "If she's willing." "She is," I said. I can hear it in her voice. The next escalation came faster than I expected. My parents called an emergency board meeting, not to discuss the lawsuit, to discuss optics. I knew because one of the board members emailed me by mistake. The subject line read, "Messaging strategy, re-Eleanor situation." Situation. I forwarded it to Dana. She replied with one sentence. "They just handed us motive." By Friday, the tension had spilled beyond lawyers' offices and into family territory. My phone rang late. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Eleanor," my father said. "We need to talk. In person." "I told you," I said evenly. "Through my attorney." "This isn't legal," he snapped. "This is family." I paused. "You made it legal when you signed papers without me. You're tearing this family apart," he said. I let the silence stretch. "You did that when you decided I was a liability," I replied. He inhaled sharply. "You think this ends well for you?" "Yes," I said. "Because it ends with the truth." A week later, the capacity evaluation came back. My grandmother was deemed partially impaired, but capable of understanding financial decisions, with proper explanation and independent counsel. Henry Wallace had not been present. Neither had an independent advocate. Dana smiled when she read the report. "This is not good for them," she said. "This is very not good." But the true shift came when my grandmother asked for a meeting. All of us. Together. Dana advised against it. "They're going to try to pressure her," she said. "I know," I replied, "which is why she won't be alone." We met in a private room at the care facility. My grandmother sat at the head of the table, wrapped in a pale blue cardigan. She looked small, fragile. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I want to understand," she said, "why my granddaughter was cut out of her own family." My mother reached for her hand. "Mom, this is stressful for you." Lorraine pulled her hand away. "What's stressful," she said, "is being lied to." No one spoke. "I remember," she continued. "Enough. I remember saying fair. I remember saying equal." She looked at my father. "You told me this was for simplicity." He nodded stiffly. "It was." "No," she said. "It was for control." The room went silent. She turned to me. "Eleanor," she said, "did you know about this?" "No," I replied. "I found out at Christmas." Her lips pressed together. "At my Christmas dinner." My mother started to cry. I didn't move. "Henry," Lorraine said, "why wasn't you there when I signed?" Henry shifted. "I wasn't informed, Lorraine." That was the moment. The moment where pretense cracked. "I want it fixed," my grandmother said. "Now," Dana spoke gently. Lorraine, legally. "I don't care," she snapped. "Then I want it challenged, publicly." My father stood. "This is unnecessary." Lorraine looked at him. So was excluding her. I watched my parents then. Really watched them. They weren't angry. They were afraid. That night, Dana called me. "They're done," she said. "They just don't know it yet." "What happens now?" I asked. "We file," she said. "And once we do, control starts slipping through their fingers." I stared out my window at the city lights. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief. Authority. Because this was no longer about inheritance. It was about reclaiming the right to exist without permission. And they were about to learn what happens when the person you underestimated stops asking and starts acting. The filing went through at 9:12 a.m. on a Monday. I remember the time because I was sitting in my office at work, calendar open, coffee untouched, watching the second hand on my watch circle like it was waiting for permission to move. Dana texted me 2 words. "It's live." That was it. No fireworks, no courtroom drama, just a timestamp and a case number that changed the balance of power in my family forever. By noon, my phone was unusable. Missed calls, voicemails, texts from numbers I hadn't heard from in years. Cousins, family friends, people who suddenly remembered my name. I didn't answer a single one. Dana had warned me this would happen. When control slips, she'd said, people scramble to reframe the story. Don't help them. so I didn't. The lawsuit challenged the trust amendment on grounds of undue influence, lack of independent counsel, and misrepresentation. It also requested a stay on any transfer of controlling interests tied to the revised structure. In plain terms, it froze everything. No further consolidation, no quiet handoffs, no assumption that the future had already been decided. Price Development Group was stuck in limbo, and that terrified them. By Tuesday morning, industry gossip had started to circulate. Not loudly, not publicly, but enough. A board member resigned. Quietly, another requested a leave of absence. The confidence my father projected for years began to thin. Dana called me that afternoon. "They're calling an emergency mediation," she said. "They want to talk." "About what?" I asked. "About settling," she replied, without admitting fault. I almost smiled. "No," I said. "Good," Dana replied. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." "Why?" "Because a settlement right now would protect them," she said. "And this isn't about protecting them." That night, my father showed up at my apartment. I hadn't told him where I lived. He stood in the hallway, coat still on, eyes rimmed red, looking older than I remembered. "We need to talk," he said. "I told you," I replied through the chain lock. "Through my attorney." "Please," he said, "not like this." I studied his face through the narrow opening. The man who had always spoken in final decisions, never questions. "What do you want?" I asked. "To understand why you're doing this," he said. "You're humiliating us." There it was. Not concern, not regret. Reputation. "I'm doing this," I said calmly, "because you decided my future, without my consent." He shook his head. "You're overreacting." I almost laughed. "You removed me from my grandmother's trust," I said. "You restructured a company built on her assets while she was cognitively impaired. You excluded me because I didn't fit your narrative." He swallowed. "We did what we thought was best." "For who?" I asked. "For the business," he said. "For stability." "And I was unstable," I said softly. He didn't answer. I closed the door. 2 days later, discovery began. That's when the real story started to surface. Emails between my parents and Caleb discussing timing and window of opportunity. Notes referencing my grandmother's declining clarity. Messages where my promotion was framed as a threat. Dana sent me excerpts with minimal commentary. She didn't need to explain them. I recognized the language. Risk, exposure, containment. That's what I'd been to them. At the same time, my grandmother deteriorated. Stress does that to people who are already fragile. She became quieter, more withdrawn. But when I visited, she still squeezed my hand. "They're angry with me," she whispered one afternoon. "I know," I said. "I don't regret it," she said. "I regret not seeing it sooner." I leaned my forehead against her hand. "You did the best you could." She smiled. That weekend, something unexpected happened. Caleb, not a text, not a message through someone else, a call. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said. I stayed silent. "They're saying the company could lose investors," he continued. "That the board might fracture." "That's possible," I replied. "You're doing this to punish us," he said. "No," I said. "I'm doing this because you took something that wasn't yours to take." He scoffed. "You didn't even want the business." "I wanted the choice," I said. "You took that." He exhaled sharply. "What do you want?" There it was. Not apology. Not accountability. Negotiation. "I want the truth on record," I said. "I want my grandmother protected. And I want my name restored." "That's not enough," he snapped. "You're blowing up everything." I waited. "You always were dramatic," he muttered. I hung up. That night, Dana sent me an update. "They're offering to reinstate your share quietly," she said, "in exchange for withdrawing the challenge." "And the company?" I asked. "They keep control," she said. "They keep the narrative." I stared at my ceiling. "No," I said. "Good," Dana replied. "Because here's what they don't know yet." "What?" "There's a clause in the original trust," she said. "One they forgot about." My heart slowed. "It triggers a redistribution if a beneficiary is excluded through coercion," she continued. "It shifts authority to an independent trustee." I sat up. "In the business?" "It loses family control entirely," she said. I closed my eyes. They hadn't just overreached. They'd stepped on a landmine. Dana's voice was calm when she said, "If this clause is enforced, your father and brother lose operational control. I didn't feel triumph. I felt inevitability. Because all I had done was stop cooperating with a system that required my silence to function. And now, without that silence, everything they built on it was starting to collapse. The clause changed everything. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was boring in the way only real power ever is. No shouting, no courtroom theatrics, just a paragraph buried in an old trust document, written decades earlier by a man who understood one simple truth. Families lie. Paper remembers. Dana explained it to me slowly, like she was handing me something fragile. Your grandfather anticipated this, she said. He built in a safeguard in case one beneficiary was pushed out to consolidate control. Did he expect this specific situation? I asked. No, she said. He expected human behavior. The clause was triggered by evidence of coercion or material misrepresentation that altered the distribution of authority. If enforced, an independent trustee would assume control over the trust's voting power, including any interests tied to the family business. In other words, Price Development Group would no longer be a family-run company. It would be professionally managed, and my father would be just another name on a list. Dana filed a supplemental motion the same day. This time, the response was immediate. Their lawyers called within hours. They wanted an emergency hearing. They wanted to negotiate. They wanted time. Dana declined all of it. Discovery hasn't even started, she told them. We're not rushing. That night, my mother sent me an email. Not a text, not a call. An email. Subject line, please. It was long, rambling, emotional in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. She wrote about family, about intentions, about how things had spiraled, about how hurt she was that I'd chosen lawyers over conversation. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop without responding, because the email wasn't for me. It was for her. 2 days later, my grandmother was hospitalized. Nothing dramatic. Dehydration, stress. The doctors were cautious with their words, but the implication was clear. This was taking a toll. My parents showed up at the hospital at the same time I did. We stood in the hallway, 3 adults who shared blood and nothing else. My mother reached for me. I stepped back. She asked for you, the nurse said, nodding toward me. Just you. My father stiffened. We're her children. The nurse didn't budge. She was very clear. Inside the room, my grandmother looked small against the white sheets. Her eyes fluttered open when I entered. There you are, she said. I'm here, I replied, taking her hand. She studied my face. You look calm. I am. She smiled faintly. Good. That means you're doing it right. I swallowed. They're angry, she said. They think you're destroying everything. I'm not, I said. I'm stopping something. She nodded. Your grandfather would have liked you. That caught me off guard. He always worried, she continued, that the business would become more important than the people. I squeezed her hand. I don't have much energy left, she said. But I want to use what I have. For what? I asked. For the truth, she said. I want to speak. On record. My chest tightened. You don't have to, I said quickly. I know, she replied. That's why I will. The deposition was scheduled for the following week. My parents tried to stop it. Their lawyers filed motions, medical objections, requests for delay, all denied. Because the capacity evaluation had already established her right to testify with accommodations. When the day came, I sat behind her, just out of view of the camera. My father sat across the room, jaw clenched, hands folded too tightly. My mother stared at the table. Caleb avoided looking at anyone. The questions were gentle at first. Name, date, relationship. Then intent. Did you intend to remove Eleanor Price from your trust? No, my grandmother said clearly. Did anyone suggest that Eleanor should be excluded? Yes. Who? She named them. One by one. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Did you understand that the documents you signed would remove her authority and future inheritance? No, she said. That was not explained. Would you have signed if you had known? No. Silence. Even the court reporter paused. Afterward, my father tried to speak to her. She turned her face away. That was the last time she ever did. 2 weeks later, she passed peacefully in her sleep. No final words, no dramatic moment, just an ending. The funeral was small, private. I sat in the second row, my parents in the front. No one spoke to me. Dana stood quietly at the back. After the service, my father approached. "I never thought it would end like this," he said. "Neither did I replied. "She wouldn't have wanted this," he said. I looked at him. "She wanted fairness. You decided that wasn't convenient." His face tightened. "You think you're winning." I shook my head. "I think this is happening." That night, Dana called me. "The trustee has been appointed," she said. "Effective immediately." I closed my eyes. "Price Development Group is now under independent management," she continued. "Your father and brother retain ownership interests, but no operational control." "And the trust?" I asked. "The amendment is invalidated," she said. "Your position is restored." I exhaled slowly. "And you?" Dana asked. "What do you want to do next?" I looked around my apartment, my life, the quiet I'd built. "I don't want a seat at their table," I said. "I want my own." She smiled, even through the phone. "Then," she said, "we'll make sure they understand that." I hung up and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on. Grief and relief sat side by side in my chest. I hadn't destroyed my family. I'd just stopped sacrificing myself to keep it intact. And that, I was beginning to understand, was the most unforgivable thing I could have done. The first board meeting under the independent trustee was held without ceremony. No family portraits, no familiar voices running the room. Just a neutral conference space downtown, glass walls, name placards printed in identical font. I wasn't required to attend. I went anyway, not to participate, to observe. The trustee, Martin Hale, was a former federal judge turned corporate mediator. Gray-haired, precise, unflappable. He didn't smile much, but when he spoke, people listened. My father sat 2 seats away from me, staring straight ahead. Caleb sat on the opposite side of the table, jaw tight, leg bouncing under his chair. For the first time in my memory, neither of them spoke first. Martin opened the meeting by laying out the facts. No emotion, no judgment. Due to findings of undue influence related to trust governance, he said, the trust's voting rights are now exercised independently. Operational authority has been reassigned accordingly. He didn't look at anyone when he said it. The effect was immediate. Questions that had once been rhetorical now required answers. Decisions that used to be waved through were deferred. Contracts were reviewed instead of assumed. Budgets were questioned. Power, stripped of habit, looks awkward. At one point, my father raised his hand. Martin acknowledged him politely. "Yes, Robert? I'd like to understand," my father said carefully, "how long this arrangement is expected to last." Martin didn't hesitate. "As long as necessary to ensure fiduciary compliance and stability." "And what does that mean, exactly?" Caleb asked. Martin folded his hands. "It means until trust is restored." No one missed the irony. After the meeting, I stood to leave. My father followed me into the hallway. "Was this what you wanted?" he asked. I stopped walking. "What I wanted," I said, "was to stop pretending I didn't see what was happening." He exhaled sharply. "You've humiliated us." I turned to face him. "You humiliated yourselves. I just stopped covering for it." He stared at me, like he was trying to recognize something familiar, and couldn't. "This company was my life," he said. "No," I replied. "It was Grandma's. You borrowed it and forgot to give it back." That night, the fallout reached beyond the company. Family friends stopped calling my parents. Holiday plans were quietly canceled. Whispers replaced invitations. People who had once praised my father's leadership now asked neutral questions. The kind that sound polite, but carry doubt. "How's the transition going?" Must be a challenging adjustment. I heard about it secondhand. Dana kept me updated on the legal side. The trustee was conducting a full audit. Emails were being reviewed. Financial decisions questioned. Nothing criminal, she told me, but a lot of ethical shortcuts. That didn't surprise me. Shortcuts are just consequences deferred. One evening, Marissa came to see me. She looked exhausted. Older than she had a month ago. "They're unraveling," she said, sitting at my kitchen table. "Caleb doesn't know who he is without the company running through him." "And you?" I asked. She shrugged. "I'm trying to keep things normal for the kids." I poured her a glass of water. "You don't have to explain anything to me." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here." She hesitated, then added, "They blame you." I expected that. "But," she continued, "they're also scared of you." That caught my attention. "Why?" Because you didn't yell, she said. You didn't beg. You didn't settle. You just acted. I thought about that. Silence, when used deliberately, unsettles people who rely on noise to dominate. A week later, my mother asked to meet me. Neutral location. A cafe near the hospital. She arrived early, hands wrapped around a coffee she hadn't touched. You look thinner, she said. So do you, I replied. We sat. I don't understand how it got this far, she said finally. I do, I replied. You let decisions replace conversations. She shook her head. We were trying to protect the family. You were trying to preserve control, I said gently. There's a difference. She looked at me then. Really looked. When did you stop needing us? She asked. I thought about it. The night I realized your love was conditional, I said. I just didn't say it out loud until now. Her eyes filled with tears. I miss you, she whispered. I'm right here, I said. I just won't be managed anymore. She reached across the table. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in either. I don't know how to fix this, she said. That's not my problem to solve, I replied. She nodded slowly, like someone hearing a truth they couldn't argue with. The trustee's report came back a month later. Operational mismanagement, favoritism, conflicts of interest. Nothing explosive, nothing headline-worthy, but enough to justify long-term independent oversight. Price Development Group would survive, but it would never be theirs in the same way again. Dana called me with the final update. The court approved the trustee's long-term plan, she said. Control won't revert automatically. I closed my eyes. And you? She asked. I'm done, I said. Legally and emotionally. She smiled through the phone. That's the hardest part. I thought the relief would be immediate. It wasn't. What came instead was space. Space where guilt used to sit. Where obligation had lived. Where I'd once tried to earn something that was never meant to be earned. One evening, as I was leaving work, I passed my reflection in a glass door and didn't immediately criticize it. That's when I knew something had changed. Not the situation. Me. The first holiday after everything fell apart came quietly. No invitations. No group text arguing over dates. No carefully staged photos posted online to prove unity. Just silence. Thanksgiving arrived on a Thursday, with gray skies and cold rain. I took the day off work and didn't travel. I cooked for myself for the first time in years. Nothing elaborate. Roasted chicken, vegetables, a small pie from the bakery downstairs. I ate alone at my kitchen table and felt something unexpected. Peace. Not the empty kind, the earned kind. My phone buzzed once that afternoon. A message from my mother, thinking of you today. I read it. I didn't respond. That boundary wasn't punishment. It was preservation. 2 weeks later, Dana called with an update I hadn't been expecting. There's a secondary issue, she said. Something uncovered during the audit. I sat up. What kind of issue? Your parents have been using company funds to cover personal expenses, she said. Nothing illegal, technically, but it violates governance standards under the new oversight. I closed my eyes. And the trustee is restructuring compensation and benefits, she continued. Effective immediately. Meaning your father's salary has been reduced, substantially, and discretionary spending privileges have been revoked. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt gravity. Actions don't always explode. Sometimes they just collapse inward. A week later, my father announced his retirement. Not publicly, not formally, just a quiet email to senior staff citing health and personal reasons. Caleb didn't take over. He couldn't. Without control, without inherited authority, he was just another executive with a thin resume and a reputation built on access. He resigned 2 months later. That was when the calls started. First Caleb, then my mother, then my father again. Not demanding, not angry, uncertain. Caleb's voicemail was the longest. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted. I never had to figure it out before. I listened once, then I deleted it. Not because I didn't care, because care no longer meant rescue. In January, I was promoted. Nothing flashy. A step up. More responsibility. More autonomy. My manager called me into her office and said, "You handle pressure differently than most people. You don't panic. You don't posture. You just move." I smiled politely. She didn't know the half of it. Around that time, I received a letter from the trustee. Formal. Neutral. It informed me that as a beneficiary, I could request distributions, participate in certain advisory capacities, or decline involvement entirely. I read it carefully. Then, I declined. I didn't want my life tethered to a structure built on old damage. Instead, I asked for one thing: that a portion of the trust be allocated to a scholarship fund in my grandmother's name, for students pursuing compliance, law, or ethics-related fields. Students without family backing. The trustee approved it without question. That felt right. My mother came to see me again in February. She looked smaller, quieter. We sat in the same cafe as before. "I don't recognize our life anymore," she said. "I do," I replied. "It just doesn't revolve around control now." She nodded. "Your father is lost." "I know." She hesitated. "Do you ever think about coming back? Being part of things again?" I met her eyes. "No," I said. "I think about being honest." She swallowed. "I wish we'd done better." "So do I," I replied. "But wishing doesn't change choices." She left without crying this time. That felt like progress. One evening, Marissa called me after putting the kids to bed. "Caleb's in therapy," she said quietly. "He hates it, but he's going." "That's good," I replied. "He asked about you," she added. "If you'd ever want to talk." I considered it. "Not now," I said. "Maybe someday." "That's fair," she said. The word fair had taken on new weight. As winter turned to spring, the story faded from public attention. No headlines, no scandal, just a quiet restructuring of power and consequence. The kind that doesn't trend, but lasts. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I saw my father across the street. He looked thinner, slower. He didn't approach me. He just nodded. I nodded back. That was all. I went home and opened my windows. Let fresh air move through rooms that had once felt heavy. For years, I thought confrontation meant raised voices, dramatic moments, final speeches. I'd been wrong. Real confrontation was paperwork, boundaries, silence that refused to bend. It was choosing not to return to a system that only functioned if you made yourself smaller. As spring settled in, I realized something else. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies, not for understanding, not for permission. I had already moved on, and the life I was building didn't require their approval to stand. The wedding invitation arrived in April. Thick cardstock, cream-colored envelope. My name written in my mother's handwriting. That alone told me it wasn't a casual gesture. Inside was an invitation to my cousin Rebecca's wedding. Charleston, early June. Black tie optional. Family expected. No note, no apology. Just an assumption, folded neatly between embossed paper. I placed it on the counter and stared at it longer than necessary. Weddings are strange that way. They pretend to be about beginnings, but they mostly expose what was never resolved. I didn't RSVP right away. A week later, my mother called. "We wanted to know if you got the invitation," she said carefully. "I did." "And?" she asked. I paused. "I'm thinking about it." Silence. "You don't have to decide right now," she said, too quickly. "I know," I replied. What I didn't say was this. I was thinking less about the wedding and more about the table assignments, the conversations, the way my absence or presence would be interpreted like a message instead of a choice. Dana had warned me this phase would come. After control collapses, she'd said, people try to rebuild access. Access to what, exactly, was never clear. That same week, the trustee issued another update. Price Development Group was selling off 2 properties, restructuring debt, cleaning house. My father's name was no longer listed on the website. Neither was Caleb's. The company still existed. It just didn't orbit them anymore. I wondered if that's how it felt, to be replaced by reality. One evening, I received an unexpected email from Henry Wallace. Subject, "For your records." Inside was a scanned document. A letter my grandfather had written years before his death. Never sent, never shared. It was addressed to my grandmother. The rain. If you're reading this, it means I wasn't able to say everything out loud. Families don't break because of money. They break because people confuse ownership with authority. If you ever feel pressured to choose sides, remember this. Fairness is not weakness, and silence is not peace. I sat back in my chair, the words settling slowly. Henry had added a short note. I found this during the file review. I thought you should have it. I printed the letter and placed it in my desk drawer beside my grandmother's card. Some things are meant to be kept, not displayed. In May, my mother tried again. This time, she asked to come to my apartment. I agreed. She stood in my doorway like a guest, unsure of the rules. She'd brought a plant, something green and harmless. I didn't know what you liked, she said. I like low maintenance, I replied. She smiled faintly. We sat on opposite ends of the couch. I want to ask you something, she said. And I need you to answer honestly. Okay. Do you hate us? The question was quieter than I expected. I considered it. No, I said. Hate requires energy I don't want to spend. She nodded, absorbing that. Then what do you feel? She asked. Distance, I said. And clarity. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. That feels worse somehow, she whispered. I know, I replied. It felt worse for me, too. She looked around my apartment. Clean, sparse, intentional. You built this without us, she said. Yes, she swallowed. We thought you'd always come back. I met her gaze. You never made it safe to. She left shortly after, the plant on my windowsill, like a placeholder. I watered it once a week, nothing more. In early June, I RSVP'd to the wedding. Yes, not for my family, for myself. The ceremony was beautiful. Charleston in summer always is. Spanish moss, warm light, everyone dressed like nothing had ever gone wrong. My parents were there. So was Caleb. We exchanged polite nods. Nothing more. At the reception, someone tapped my shoulder. An older woman I barely recognized. One of my grandmother's friends. Eleanor, she said warmly. Your grandmother used to talk about you all the time. That surprised me. She said you were the only one who listened without trying to manage her, the woman continued. She was very proud of you. I felt something tighten behind my eyes. Thank you, I said. Later, Caleb approached me near the bar. He looked uncomfortable, older. I heard about the scholarship fund, he said. Yes, that's good, he added. That's very you. I nodded. I'm trying to figure out what's next, he said, without the company. That's something everyone has to do eventually, I replied. He hesitated. I'm sorry, for my part. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't complete, but it was something. I hear you, I said. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. When I left the wedding early, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I'd closed a door gently, without slamming it or leaving it ajar. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, sunlight filling the room, and realized something quietly important. I was no longer bracing for impact. No longer anticipating the next move, the next manipulation, the next request to explain myself. The story had reached a place where it no longer needed me to push it forward. It could end. Or it could simply continue, without my constant involvement. And for the first time, that choice was mine. The call came on a Sunday morning. The kind that slips past your defenses because you're not prepared for conflict before coffee. It was my father. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. I answered the third time. Eleanor, he said. His voice was thinner than I remembered, less certain. What do you want? I asked, not unkindly, just direct. I need your help, he said. I closed my eyes. Help with what? He hesitated. I've been asked to step down from the board, completely. I thought you already had, I said. Not officially, he replied. They want a formal resignation. They're concerned about optics. There it was again. Optics. And? I asked. They want a statement, he continued. Something that signals unity, family support. I let the silence stretch. You want me to write it, I said. Yes, he admitted. Or at least approve it. I laughed once, quietly. You want my credibility, I said. He didn't deny it. You took my name out of the trust without asking, I continued. You spoke for me when it suited you. Now you want me to speak for you? I made mistakes, he said. I'm paying for them. No, I replied. You're experiencing consequences. The distinction mattered. I won't do it, I said. His breath caught. Please. That word, from him, landed heavier than he intended. No, I repeated. But I'll tell you something you won't like. I'm listening. If you want to resign with dignity, I said, tell the truth. Say you overreached. Say you failed to protect fairness. Say you're stepping back because you should have earlier. That would ruin me, he said. No, I replied. It would humanize you. He was silent. You spent your life believing control was the same as respect, I continued. It isn't. Respect comes when you stop clinging. He exhaled slowly. You always did talk like your grandfather. I smiled faintly. He taught me to read contracts. We ended the call without agreement. 2 days later, his resignation statement was released. It was vague, careful, bloodless, no mention of me. I expected to feel angry. I didn't. Because something else had already shifted. That week, I was asked to lead a new initiative at work. Cross-departmental, high visibility. The kind of project that tests judgment more than intelligence. I accepted without hesitation. The irony didn't escape me. The family that doubted my capacity had lost control because they underestimated it. Meanwhile, my life kept expanding in small, steady ways. I joined a gym. I slept better. I stopped checking my phone for messages that never came. In late July, I visited my grandmother's grave for the first time, alone. No family, no ceremony, just me and a small bouquet of wildflowers. I hope I did right by you, I said quietly. The wind moved through the trees like an answer. That afternoon, Dana called with the final legal update. The case is officially closed, she said. The trust is settled. Oversight remains in place. There's nothing left to litigate. I leaned against my kitchen counter. How do you feel about it? She paused. Professionally? Satisfied. Personally? Impressed. Why? You didn't chase revenge, she said. You chased alignment. That's rarer. After we hung up, I stood in my apartment, taking in the quiet. No waiting, no rehearsing conversations, no imagining alternate endings. Just presence. That evening, my mother sent one last message. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm proud of you. I read it twice. Then I replied with a single sentence. I hope you learn to be proud without needing control. She didn't respond, and that was okay. In August, I took a week off and drove north alone. No destination beyond movement. I stopped when I felt like it, slept when I was tired, ate when I was hungry. No itinerary, no expectations. Somewhere near the coast, sitting in a diner with bad coffee and perfect silence, I realized the story I'd been living inside had finally loosened its grip. It no longer needed to escalate. The revenge everyone expects in these stories had already happened. Not in a courtroom explosion or a public shaming, but in the quiet removal of access. They could no longer shape me, and I no longer needed to prove anything. When I returned home, the plant my mother brought had grown. New leaves, stronger stem. I moved it closer to the window. Growth, I'd learned, doesn't require permission. It just requires space. I thought the story was over. That's the mistake people make when things finally get quiet. They assume silence means resolution. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's just the pause before the last truth surfaces. The email arrived in September, buried between meeting invites and compliance updates. Subject: Estate Accounting Notice. I almost deleted it. Almost. It was from the Independent Trustee's office. Routine language, formal tone. But one sentence caught my eye. During the final reconciliation of the estate, a discrepancy was identified requiring beneficiary acknowledgement. Discrepancy. That word has weight when you work in my field. I opened the attachment. It was an accounting summary of my grandmother's estate prior to the trust amendment. Assets, liabilities, transfers. And then I saw it. A line item from 3 years earlier. A property transfer. Not part of Price Development Group. Not listed in the revised trust. Not mentioned in any family conversation I'd ever been part of. A residential property. Lake adjacent. Listed under a separate LLC. Owner: Eleanor Price. I stared at the screen, convinced I was misreading it. I wasn't. I called the trustee's office immediately. There must be a mistake, I said when they answered. I don't own any property. There was a pause. According to the documents, the administrator said, the property was transferred to you directly by your grandmother. Recorded and notarized. When? I asked. 3 years ago, she replied. Shortly after your grandfather's letter was written. My pulse slowed in that strange way it does when shock gives way to clarity. Why was I never told? I asked. We can't speak to family decisions, she said carefully. but the transfer was intentionally excluded from the family trust. Excluded. On purpose. I drove to the address that weekend. 2 hours north. Quiet road. Trees changing color. The kind of place you don't stumble upon by accident. The house sat back from the water. Modest, but solid. White siding, wraparound porch. Dock extending into still, dark water. It felt intentional. There was a lockbox on the door. Inside was a single key and a folded envelope. My name, in my grandmother's handwriting. I sat on the porch before opening it. Ellie, if you're here, it means things went the way I feared they might. I didn't tell you about this place because I didn't want it taken from you. I didn't put it in the trust because I didn't trust the people who thought they owned everything I built. This house is not an inheritance. It's an exit. I read the letter twice, then a third time. Inside the house, everything was simple, clean, almost bare. A table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf with old paperbacks, a desk by the window. And in the desk drawer, another letter. You were always watching, listening. You noticed what others missed. That made you inconvenient, so I made you independent. Don't feel guilty. I didn't choose sides. I chose clarity. Use this place however you need, or sell it, or never come back. Just know it was never meant to trap you, only to free you. I sat on the floor and let the quiet settle around me. This wasn't revenge. This was foresight. My grandmother had seen the family dynamics long before I did. She hadn't fought them directly. She'd stepped around them, and she'd trusted me with the result. I spent the night there. No internet, no television. Just water, trees, and the sound of wind against the dock. The next morning, I walked the property line, read the deed. Everything was legitimate, clean, untouchable. They couldn't contest it. They didn't even know it existed. When I returned home, I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not Caleb, not Marissa, not even Dana. Some things don't need witnesses. 2 weeks later, my father called again. I heard about the accounting notice, he said. Is there something I should know? I smiled to myself. No, I said. Everything's clear. He hesitated. There was talk of a missing asset. Then it wasn't missing, I replied. It was placed. Silence. You knew? He asked. I do now, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. She planned this, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. She did. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. That conversation ended something I hadn't realized was still open, because now I understood the full picture. My grandmother hadn't just corrected an injustice at the end of her life. She'd prepared for it years in advance. She'd known who would grab for control, and she'd known who would survive without it. That night, I sat at my desk and made a decision. I wasn't going to sell the house. I wasn't going to move there either. I was going to keep it exactly as it was. A reminder that not all victories are loud. Some are quiet, patient, and waiting for the right person to arrive. And in the final chapter of this story, I would understand exactly why she trusted me with that kind of ending. I didn't tell anyone about the lake house, not because I was afraid it would be taken, but because for the first time in my life, I had something that existed without needing to be explained, defended, or justified. That mattered more than I realized at first. The months after the discovery passed quietly. Work, routine, a life that no longer revolved around reacting to other people's decisions. My parents stopped calling. Not abruptly, gradually. First the long gaps between messages, then the shorter ones, then nothing. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a fight. It was distance settling into place, like furniture that finally fits the room. Caleb sent a text once in November. Hope you're doing okay. I replied with 2 words. I am. That was the truth. At Christmas, I didn't go home. I didn't make an announcement about it. I didn't justify my absence. I simply stayed where I was. I spent the holiday at the lake house. Snow dusted the dock lightly, the water dark and still. I brought groceries, a few books, and nothing else. No laptop, no agenda. On Christmas morning, I made coffee and sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. For years, Christmas had meant performance. Being present without being included, smiling without being seen, participating in rituals that reinforced exactly where I ranked. This time, there was none of that, just quiet. And in that quiet, something finally settled. I had spent most of my life believing that being chosen meant being loved. That if I was patient enough, good enough, accommodating enough, someone would eventually turn around and say, "You matter." What I learned instead was this: people who benefit from your silence will always call it peace. People who benefit from your compliance will always call it love. And people who benefit from control will always say they're doing it for your own good. The hardest part wasn't losing my place in my family. It was realizing how long I'd been negotiating my dignity to keep it. The lake house wasn't an inheritance. It was proof. Proof that someone had seen me clearly and trusted me enough to give me an exit instead of a cage. In January, I finalized the paperwork to place the house into a separate trust of my own. Simple, clean, no beneficiaries listed beyond myself, no assumptions, no future negotiations. Dana reviewed it and smiled. "Your grandmother would approve," she said. "I know," I replied. That spring, I stood before a small group of students at the university where the scholarship fund had been established. I wasn't announced as a benefactor, just a speaker. I told them about boundaries, about contracts, about the difference between loyalty and obligation. I didn't mention my family. I didn't need to. Afterward, a woman in her early 20s approached me. "My parents think I'm selfish for wanting my own life," she said quietly. I looked at her and saw a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. "You're not selfish," I told her. "You're just early." She nodded, like she'd been waiting to hear that from someone who had survived it. That was when I understood the final piece. Revenge isn't about watching other people fall. It's about refusing to fall with them. It's about choosing yourself so completely that the system built to contain you collapses without your participation. My parents didn't lose because I exposed them. They lost because they no longer had access to me, to my compliance, my silence, my credibility. I didn't confront them at a wedding, a Christmas dinner. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I signed papers. I called a lawyer. I stopped showing up. And in doing so, I reclaimed something far more valuable than inheritance. I reclaimed authorship. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if you've ever been excluded, managed, or quietly erased by people who said they loved you, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not required to stay where your dignity is negotiable. You are not obligated to absorb injustice just because it comes from family. And you do not owe access to anyone who mistakes control for care. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is a life that no longer revolves around the people who tried to shrink you. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like the video. It helps more than you think. If you've lived through something similar, leave a comment. You're not alone, even when it feels like you are. And if you want to hear more stories about family betrayal, inheritance, and the quiet kind of karma that comes from choosing yourself, subscribe and stay, because there are many ways to lose a family, and there are just as many ways to find yourself.